For as long as I can remember, the Alden family cruise had been less about sailing and more about spectacle. Each summer, my parents chartered a luxury yacht and paraded us through the Caribbean like royalty. Every cocktail hour a stage for business triumphs and social conquests. To them, the sea wasn't freedom. It was a mirror in which they could admire themselves. This year, I wasn't even invited. The message came on a Tuesday morning, a vibration on my phone that I expected to be routine. Instead, I saw my mother's name and her careful words. This year's cruise is for successful families only. You'll understand? I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. After years of enduring their subtle jabs and backhanded praise, this was no misunderstanding. It was a dismissal, deliberate and final. I could almost hear my mother's voice in the phrasing, gentle enough to sound civil, sharp enough to wound. She hadn't even bothered to call. The Aldens never raised their voices. Cruelty was always laced in velvet. My hands trembled as I set the phone on my desk. Around me, the office hummed with the steady rhythm of maritime luxuries phones ringing, printers humming, crew schedules being finalized for the summer season. Outside the glass wall, the harbor glittered with sunlight bouncing off the masts of yachts waiting in their slips. And there it was, the irony. The very family that branded me unworthy had booked a charter without knowing the vessel they would soon boast about belonged to me, my fleet, my company, my life's work. The sting of rejection burned deep, but beneath it something older stirred an ache that had lived in me since childhood, begging not just to be seen, but to be believed. It was the beginning of a reckoning I had postponed for years, and now I could no longer avoid it. I grew up in a Beacon Hill brownstone, its brick facade polished like a badge of pedigree. Inside, every room was curated for effect antique portraits, silk draperies, the kind of rugs you weren't allowed to walk on without removing your shoes. It looked like a home in every magazine spread my mother admired, but to me it always felt like a showroom, a place staged to impress rather than to live. At the dinner table, my family spoke the language of markets. My father dissected mergers and interest rates while my brother, even as a teenager, parroted investment strategies he barely understood. My mother would sit poised, lips painted in her signature red, nodding at the numbers as if they were proof of our worth. There was never space for dreams or feelings, only metrics. Income defines worth. My father repeated so often it became scripture. His voice was always calm, his tailored suits immaculate, his approval measured in slight nods rather than affection. When I came home with perfect grades, he would glance at my report card, offer the smallest smile, and then ask how I planned to do better next semester. I tried to earn warmth where there was none. I memorized Latin roots, solved equations, and lined my desk with trophies, thinking perhaps one more award would tilt his head a little longer, that maybe he would say he was proud. He never did. My mother was no different. Her love came in corrections. Sit straighter. Walk lighter. Never let your voice shake in public. Even then, I felt something hollow growing inside me, a space where affection should have been. My achievements stacked higher each year, but instead of filling the gap, they only deepened it. By the time I reached adulthood, I understood that success in my family was not a source of love, only a ticket to remain in their orbit. And when I chose to step away from their orbit years later, I knew I would pay the price. By the time I graduated, there was never really a choice. My father had already lined up interviews at finance firms in Boston, and I stepped into that world with the same obedience that had carried me through school. The office gleamed with glass and steel, every corner humming with ambition. At first, I thought if I worked hard enough, I might finally belong not just in the firm, but in my family's definition of success. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. The competition was relentless, each colleague a rival disguised as a teammate. Spreadsheets stretched into the night, and I often found myself locking bathroom doors just to breathe. Panic attacks came without warning, tight chest, racing heart, the world closing in while I clutched the edge of a sink. Sundays became dread-filled vigils for the week ahead, my body revolting against the life I had been groomed to pursue. At 25, I broke. I typed my resignation letter, closed the door on that corner cubicle, and refused to step back into it. For the first time in my life, I made a choice that wasn't approved, vetted, or applauded. I accepted a job at a marina in Newport, Rhode Island, scrubbing decks and learning ropes instead of parsing market forecasts. The family's reaction was swift. Marcus sneered over dinner, calling it a quarter-life crisis. My mother fretted about how she could possibly explain me at the next charity gala. And my father, expression unreadable, dismissed it entirely. She's just playing with boats. She'll come back when reality sets in. But reality had already set in, just not the one they recognized. I found solace in salt air and wooden docks, in the rhythm of tides rather than the tick of stock tickers. For the first time, I wasn't suffocating. I didn't know then where that choice would lead, only that it felt like a lifeline. And once my hands gripped that rope, I wasn't letting go. The morning the message arrived, I was in my office overlooking Newport Harbor, reviewing charter contracts. The water outside glittered with movement sails unfurling, gulls sweeping low, and for a moment I felt steady, as if my life had finally found its own tide. Then my phone buzzed, and steadiness shattered. My mother's words appeared on the screen. "The family has decided this year's cruise will be a celebration of success. Given your choices, we think it's best you sit this one out. This cruise is for successful families only." I read it 3 times, as if repetition would dull the sting. It didn't. A lump lodged in my throat, the same familiar ache I'd carried since childhood, the reminder that nothing I did outside their definition of success would ever count. I tried to swallow it down, but the bitterness clung. I didn't realize Taylor had stepped into my office until she placed a cup of coffee on my desk. "You look like someone just canceled Christmas," she said. "My family," I answered flatly. "They've uninvited me." "Apparently. I'm not successful enough." Taylor froze, then set her own mug down with deliberate care. "They don't know. Do they? They think I manage a marina. Maybe, if I've been lucky. I've worked my way up to shift supervisor." I almost laughed at how absurd it sounded, but the knot in my chest was too tight. Taylor leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "You're letting them write a story that isn't true. And now, fate's handed you the perfect ending. They've booked Azure Crest, your flagship yacht, without realizing it. Don't you see? This is your moment." Her words landed with a force I wasn't ready for. I had dreamed of recognition. Yes, but never in this way. I wanted their love unmeasured by bank accounts. I wanted them to see me for myself, not as an asset. To reveal everything now, wouldn't that just prove their point that only wealth makes someone worthy? But Taylor pressed on. "You've given them years to value you without it. They never have. Let them see who you really are." That night, I called Captain Miller. His voice, steady as the tide, carried through the line. When I explained the situation, he paused only briefly before saying, "Understood. Miss Alden, we'll prepare for your arrival. We arranged it carefully. My family would board first. I would come later, not as a guest, but as the owner. Enough time for them to settle. Enough time for them to believe their narrative before I stepped onto my own deck and rewrote it." The morning of the cruise was bright and sharp, the kind of day Newport Harbor seemed designed for. I arrived later than my family, deliberately giving them time to perform their grand entrance. From the parking lot, I could already see them on the dock, Marcus barking at dockhands about luggage placement as though he were in charge. My mother pausing at the gangway with her practiced smile angled toward imaginary cameras. My father striding with the easy entitlement of a man convinced the world existed to serve him. I waited until they had vanished up the polished teak steps of Azure Crest before walking down the pier. I had chosen my outfit carefully: white linen pants, a navy blouse, gold jewelry that whispered rather than shouted. I wanted authority, but not ostentation. The sea breeze lifted my hair as I approached the security officer stationed at the gangway. Before I could speak, my mother appeared at the rail, her expression tightening when she recognized me. She descended quickly, that social smile still fixed, but her eyes cold. "Serafina," she said under her breath, leaning close as though shielding me from view. "This cruise is for successful families only." I was very clear. Her words should have stung, but instead a steadiness settled in my chest. Before I could answer, Captain Miller emerged from the deck above, his tone measured but firm. "Miss Alden, welcome aboard. We weren't expecting you quite yet, but everything is prepared." The shift was immediate. My mother froze, her smile faltering, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening on the rail. My father appeared behind her, confusion creasing his face. Marcus stopped mid-sentence, turning toward us. I reached into my bag and pulled out the ring of keys that opened every lock aboard Azure Crest. The company's crest gleamed on the brass fob. I let them dangle for a moment before slipping the master key free. "Well," I said evenly, eyes on my mother's, "it's my yacht. So everyone stay." The boarding passes slid from her hand and fluttered onto the dock. My father's mouth opened, then closed again, his certainty unmoored. Marcus stared as if he had misheard. I stepped past them and onto the deck, the wood firm beneath my feet, as the balance of power shifted with the tide. That evening, the dining salon glowed under soft light, the mahogany table set with silver and crystal polished to perfection. Chef Marcel had prepared a spread worthy of royalty: lobster tails, seared scallops, platters of fresh fruit and breads still warm from the oven. The scent of butter and herbs lingered in the air as the family gathered, their voices low with unease after the shock of the afternoon. I let them sit first, deliberately arriving last. When I entered, all conversation stilled. I crossed the room without hesitation and took the seat at the head of the table. My father's brows lifted, his jaw tightening at the sight of me occupying the place he had assumed would be his. Eleanor broke the silence first. "Darling, you've outdone yourself," she said brightly, as though she had always known of my success. "This yacht, this meal, your taste is impeccable. We couldn't be prouder." Her pivot was smooth, her voice carrying for the benefit of anyone who might be listening, though the tightness around her mouth betrayed the scramble beneath. Marcus leaned forward, eager to regain ground. "Impressive operation you've got here. Sarah, but tell me, what's your growth plan? A boutique fleet is fine for now, but unless you scale aggressively, you'll be overtaken by larger firms." His tone carried the same smugness he once used to recount his bonuses. Camille, perched beside him in a silk dress, added with a soft laugh, "Oh, but Marcus, don't you think it's charming? Sarah has built something that feels personal, and honestly, it's so glamorous." I sipped my wine before answering. "We're expanding, but at a pace that protects quality. Luxury doesn't scale the way spreadsheets do. Marcus, our clients choose us because we aren't mass market." My father studied me, measuring, recalculating. His silence was more telling than words. I ate calmly, spoke when spoken to, never boasting, never yielding. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider tolerated at the table. I was the anchor around which the evening revolved. And as the plates were cleared, the ocean outside shifted, the wind carrying the promise of a storm. The second night began quietly enough, the sea dark but calm beneath a low-hanging moon. After dinner, I excused myself early, choosing fresh air on the upper deck over the forced pleasantries of coffee and dessert. The wind had sharpened, carrying a chill uncommon for summer in the Atlantic, and I felt the yacht shudder beneath my feet in a way I knew too well. By the time Captain Miller joined me, the first drops of rain had spattered the teak. "Systems moved in faster than forecast," he said. "Winds building, seas climbing. We'll need to adjust course." Within the hour, the storm was upon us. Waves slammed the hull with the force of a hammer, each impact sending a tremor through the vessel. 10-foot swells lifted Azure Crest like a toy before dropping her hard, and the dining salon erupted in panic. My mother stumbled in, silk shawl soaked, eyes wild. "This isn't normal," she shouted, gripping the wall. Richard, do something. My father, pale himself, could only cling to the rail as another wave struck. Marcus appeared next, his complexion the color of paper, jaw clenched against nausea. Camille, mascara running, clung to her husband's arm and whispered that we were going to die. I didn't waste breath on reassurance. I headed for the bridge, taking the stairs 2 at a time, rain lashing my face. The crew was already in motion, voices crisp over the storm. I stepped beside Captain Miller, scanning the radar. "Adjust 5 degrees east," I ordered. "We'll reach the cove by dawn if we hold this line. Stabilizers to maximum. Aye, Miss Alden." The first mate responded, moving to the controls. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the faces of my family clustered at the doorway, drawn by fear and curiosity. They watched as I spoke calmly with the crew, issued directions, and braced myself against each roll of the yacht. Not once did my voice rise above steady command. For years they had seen me as weak, frivolous, even laughable. Now, in the chaos of the storm, they saw something else: competence, authority, a steadiness they lacked. By the time the seas eased hours later, their silence was louder than the wind. And I knew the storm had done more than test the yacht. It had changed what could no longer be unseen. By morning, the seas had calmed, but the family was different. The storm had stripped away the polish they wore like armor. At breakfast, no one boasted or postured. Silence hung heavier than the night's thunder. It was my mother who spoke first, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "I've spent my whole life trying to keep control," she said, fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "Appearances, standing, reputation, all of it. And last night I realized none of that means a thing when the waves rise." She didn't look at me, but the admission itself was more than I expected. My father cleared his throat. "You handled yourself well. Better than I could have predicted." The words were clipped, but they carried weight. He was acknowledging not just survival, but competence. Yet, even as he spoke, I saw the calculation in his eyes, the numbers, the scale of the business, the valuation he still couldn't stop measuring. Marcus leaned back, pale but steady. "I didn't know you knew all that. Navigation, systems, command. I thought you just managed." The grudging respect in his tone was as close to an apology as I'd ever get. Camille studied me openly, envy flickering in her gaze before softening into awe. "You looked like you belonged up there," she said. "Not like you were pretending, like the rest of us." It was Amanda, our cousin, who surprised me most. She was still in college, shadowing Marcus for the summer. "I've been miserable in my finance internship," she admitted. "But seeing you last night, I realized I want something that feels real, not just prestigious." Her eyes met mine with a kind of clarity that made my chest tighten. The cracks were there now, hairline fractures in the walls that had defined us, and for the first time I wondered what might grow in the space they left behind. By the time we reached Nassau, the storm was already a memory, but its mark lingered in the way my family moved quieter, slower, stripped of the constant edge of competition. No one bragged about portfolios or corner offices. The air was subdued, as though each of them was still turning over what they had seen on the bridge. We gathered on the main deck for departure, the skyline rising behind us. My father stood beside me, his hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment he said nothing, then asked, "Same time next year." The words carried more weight than their simplicity suggested, an opening I hadn't expected. "Yes," I answered, meeting his gaze steadily. "But this time, everyone gets a proper invitation." His eyes flickered in acknowledgement, and for once, he didn't argue. As they disembarked one by one, I stayed behind, letting the silence of the yacht settle around me. My mother offered a careful smile. Marcus a stiff nod, Camille a look tinged with curiosity rather than scorn. Even Amanda paused to squeeze my hand, her eyes bright with something like hope. When the dock was clear, I walked to the bow. The sea was calm, the horizon awash in sunrise gold. I breathed in the salt air and let it fill me, steady and sure. For years, I had carried the weight of their disapproval like an anchor, measuring myself against their yardsticks and finding myself lacking. But here, with the sun climbing over Azure Crest, I understood what I had built. Success was never about their validation. It was about living in alignment with myself, unshaken by their definitions. And at last, I felt the peace of no longer needing to prove a thing,